Tonight on Reporting Scotland, as hundreds of prisoners are set to be released early, a support charity tells us the issue of overcrowding in jails is being put before victims and public safety.
Resources and the capacity and the views about how to reduce prison population numbers have taken precedence over victim and public safety.
Those serving sentences for domestic or sexual offences are excluded from the early release scheme. Also on tonight's programme.
It's quite difficult living with black mould, and the council keep telling us things like, oh, we'll just vent your bath or vent your house. So some of my windows don't close, the house is always vented.
Residents at a block of council flats in Leith say the building's poor condition is breaching their human rights. The issue was raised at a United Nations conference. Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, criticises Scotland's introduction of buffer zones around clinics offering abortion services. A man living with MND says the complex benefit system left him struggling to access help he was entitled to.
And coming up in tonight's sport, under pressure, Rangers boss Philippe Clement admits there are no guarantees for a football manager, but vows to fight on and make the team better.
Hello, I'm Sarah McMullen. Welcome to Friday's programme. Starting next week, up to 390 prisoners sentenced to less than 4 years in jail are to be released after serving 40% of their sentence. The charity Victim Support Scotland says tackling prison overcrowding is being put ahead of victims and public safety. The charity, alongside the Scottish Prison Service, are jointly calling for victims of crime to sign up to a notification scheme, as Gillian Sharp now reports.
Scotland's prisons are operating above capacity. In an effort to tackle that, from next week, 3 groups of prisoners are to be released early over a 6-week period. Those serving sentences for domestic abuse or sexual offences aren't included. One charity supporting victims of crime says early releases increase anxiety across the board.
There is a feeling, definitely, that we've heard, which is that victims' experiences and their safety are not being prioritised in these discussions and haven't really since COVID, and that resources and that capacity and that views about how to reduce prison population numbers have taken precedence over victim and public safety.
Emergency legislation on early releases was passed in Parliament last year. A Scottish Government spokesperson says we will continue to work closely with victim support organisations to ensure that accessible information is available to victims on the change to the release point for short-term prisoners. The Scottish Prison Service says rehabilitation work focuses on prisoners whose release is imminent.
Due to the numbers we have, we're not able to spend as much time as we would want to working with people. However, we are prioritising those people who are going to be released. We saw in the releases that happened during the summer last year that a small number of people who have reoffended, but we have worked with partners then and learnt from that as well to work with partners to have the best support for them up to release and after release to support their reintegration.
The Prison Service and Victim Support Scotland are jointly urging victims of crime to sign up for the scheme, including at the SPS website, which notifies them if they will be affected by a prisoner release. Gillian Sharp, Reporting Scotland.
A nurse manager has told an employment tribunal she wasn't frightened to say the wrong thing in the aftermath of an incident between a nurse and a transgender doctor in a female changing room. Esther Davison said she felt it was the best decision at the time to suspend Sandy Peggy following a verbal exchange with Dr Beth Upton. Nurse Peggy claims she was subjected to unlawful harassment by being made to share a changing room with the doctor. Stephen Godden now reports.
If fresh evidence was needed that this isn't your typical employment tribunal, then Sandy Peggy's arrival this morning provided it. The nurse's claim, disputed by NHS Fife, is that being made to share a female changing room at the Victoria Hospital with a transgender doctor, Beth Upton, amounted to harassment under the Equality Act. Esther Davidson is the nurse manager who suspended Sandy Peggy following a complaint from the doctor about a confrontation in the changing room on Christmas Eve 2023. Miss Davidson told the inquiry there had been another allegation that Sandy Peggy walked out of a cubicle while treating a patient when Beth Upton walked in, and that patient safety was part of the reason for her suspension. Sandy Peggy's lawyer, Naomi Cunningham, put it to Esther Davidson that the handwritten reasons for suspension, which referred to bullying and harassment, made no mention of patient safety. It's not been documented, but that is my handwriting, the nurse manager replied. If those allegations were true then, was it not seriously remiss of Dr Upton not to have reported them at the time, the lawyer asked. In response, Miss Davidson said she would have expected Dr Upton to have reported them to a supervisor, but that because Beth had stayed in the cubicle, there was no detriment to the patient. The tribunal heard that following an initial complaint in August from Sandy Peggy that she was uncomfortable with the changing room situation, Esther Davidson sought advice from HR and was told that as a trans woman, Beth Upton had a right to use it. Naomi Cunningham put it to Esther Davidson that she'd been placed in an impossible position, that Beth Upton's right to use the female changing room was a given that couldn't be challenged, and that NHS Fife's policy that gender trumps sex had a vice-like grip on the health board. You know it's terrible trouble for anyone who admits that men can't be women and women can't be men, Miss Cunningham asked. You've seen the trouble Sandy is in. That's why we see you saying what you're supposed to say. You're frightened. I'm certainly not frightened, Esther Davidson replied. I treat people as I find them. I respect their beliefs and treat them as individuals. At an early stage, a tribunal judge observed that this case raises the issue of trans women's rights to access single-sex spaces in unusually clear and stark terms. It will, though, be some time before there are any answers to the questions being posed. Proceedings have now been adjourned until July, when another 2 weeks of evidence will be heard. Stephen Godden reporting, Scotland, Dundee.
Now, if you're familiar with train spotting, you'll know that the Banana Flats in Leith get a mention as the childhood home of one of Irvine Welsh's main characters, Sick Boy. But for today's residents, their issues are far from fiction as they fight to have their properties fixed. Tenants say City of Edinburgh Council is breaching their human rights over the condition of the A-listed block, citing damp, mould, pests and broken lifts ahead of a delayed retrofit which is due to start next year. Richard Forbes has more on this now.
Cable's Wind House was built 60 years ago and plans for a major refurbishment are in the pipeline. But tenants say that means all the current repairs keep getting put on the back burner.
It's quite difficult living with black mould. And the council keep telling us things like, oh, we'll just vent your bath or vent your house. So some of my windows don't close, so the house is always vented, you know. I have severe asthma. My daughters both have asthma. We are all prone to significant chest infections. It's horrible, you know. The kids are off school for extended periods of time. I can't breathe.
It's not just the individual flats that have issues. The communal areas are also in need of repair.
We're very grateful that the money will be spent on the building. However, we've still got to live in this building. We still have to live in our homes, and we shouldn't fall through the cracks just because there's going to be this refit, which has already been pushed back.
In an 8-storey building, the lifts are essential, but residents say these ones aren't very reliable.
The lifts are they've broken down, or some people have got stuck in the lifts. That really affects people's day-to-day life. You know, if you're disabled, sometimes people were concerned about coming out of the house because they weren't sure if they were going to get back in again. It can have an absolutely massive impact on people's health, their mental health, and just their ability to get involved in community life.
This campaigner says all these issues mean that the residents' human right to housing is being breached. She's helped them to take their case to the United Nations.
The United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights are reading this report, looking at the state of housing in Scotland and looking at what needs to be done to address the human rights of the residents here in Cable's Wind House.
That committee met at the UN headquarters in New York this morning, and the recommendations are expected in due course. In the meantime, Edinburgh Council says it's planning a £69 million refurbishment of the property.
We're doing a big investment programme to rectify the many failures that tenants have experienced and are continue to experience, and that will be getting underway soon. Pleased that that's happening, sad and sorry that things have been in such a state for our tenants. That shouldn't have been the case. We have failed as a council, as a landlord on that.
The local authority has confirmed that work to renovate the building is scheduled to begin in spring next year. Richard Forbes, reporting Scotland.
Well, in other news this evening, a vaccination programme to protect vulnerable groups against a dangerous respiratory disease has cut hospital stays for older people within 4 months. That's according to a study by Public Health Scotland. RSV affects the breathing system and can cause severe illness for some people. Research shows vaccine uptake resulted in a 62% reduction in RSV-related hospitalisations and those aged 75 to 79. Well, Katie Hunter joins us in the studio now. And Katie, this all sounds really quite positive.
Yep, Sarah, RSV is a common, highly infectious respiratory virus. As you mentioned, it affects the breathing system. And in some higher risk groups, including older adults, it can be quite serious. Now, Scotland's new RSV vaccination programme was launched in August last year, and adults aged between 75 and 79 were urged to come forward before winter to get this vaccine. And by the end of November last year, 2024, uptake of the vaccine in this age group was 68%. Now, a study by Public Health Scotland and the University of Strathclyde has shown positive results as a result of the vaccine.
The uptakes that we have achieved, it reduces hospital admissions from RSV-related infection by 62% in those who are vaccinated. This is the 75 to 79-year-olds. That's a significant reduction in terms of hospital admissions. People who are at that age will be protected from getting this serious illness, which is mainly pneumonia or lower respiratory tract infection.
But Katie, the key here seems to be then keeping that vaccination rate high.
Yes, Scotland was the first nation in the UK to introduce this RSV vaccine. And there has, in recent years, been a drop-off in the uptake of certain immunisations in Scotland. But as we said earlier, the uptake between 75 to 79-year-olds of this vaccine was 68%. Now, Public Health Scotland and the Scottish Government say that that is encouraging, but they would like it to be higher. And they are urging anyone who's eligible for the vaccine, including pregnant women, to come forward and get it when they're called to.
OK, Katie Hunter, thank you very much for talking us through all of that there. Well, in a surprising intervention, the US Vice President has criticised the use of laws which enforce buffer zones around abortion clinics here in Scotland. JD Vance was speaking at a security conference in Munich this afternoon. Well, our political correspondent Phil Sim joins me now from outside the US consulate in Edinburgh. So Phil, tell us, what did he have to say then on this issue?
Well, JD Vance was speaking at this conference, which has chiefly been focused on the war in Ukraine, but I suppose we should be prepared to expect the unexpected when it comes to the Trump administration, and he used this event to talk about what he sees as the retreat of freedom of speech in Europe. He took particular aim at the use of buffer zones in the UK. These are laws which prohibit protests or vigils from taking place in the area around clinics which offer abortion services. He talked about the case of a man in England who was convicted of breaching one of these zones, and he talked about the law in Scotland too. A bill was passed at Holyrood last year which sets up 200-metre safe access zones around these clinics. Here's what JD Vance had to say about them.
Just a few months ago, the Scottish Government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
So Phil, what has the response been to this?
Well, the Scottish Government has been clear in saying that they believe JD Vance's comments are incorrect. They say nothing in the law prohibits private prayer at home. They say the law was carefully drafted only to capture intentional or reckless behaviour which tries to block or influence the decision of women seeking access to these facilities. The letters that JD Vance was talking about were meant to warn people of actions which could be seen or heard from inside the buffer zones, things like people putting up posters in their windows or protesting in their gardens. Obviously, nobody is is going to know if you are praying unobtrusively inside your house. The Green MSP who drew up the law, Gillian Mackay, put this rather more bluntly. She said JD Vance is spreading shocking and shameless misinformation. She said he's peddling total nonsense and dangerous scaremongering. We knew the Trump presidency was going to ruffle some feathers. I think they delight in doing so. JD Vance has obviously chosen this speech as a moment to make a point about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, also about immigration. He's really talking about the issues, the values that his government holds and which he feels are not reciprocated overseas.
Our political correspondent Phil Sim at the US Consulate in Edinburgh. Thank you very much for all of that. OK, time for some of the day's other stories now. Police officers here are to get a 4.75% pay rise from next month, backdated to last April. The initial offer of 4.75% was made to staff last year, but those representing workers returned with a 5.5% counter-offer, and ACAS arbitrators were called in. The Scottish Police Federation, which represents rank-and-file officers, said it acknowledged the ACAS ruling, but was deeply disappointed. And elderly and vulnerable adults in Angus are being warned about a scam involving fraudsters pretending to be NHS workers. The Angus Financial Support Abuse Team says a company has been cold calling people in the area claiming to work with the NHS in order to access people's homes. The bogus workers attempt to sell people hospital beds and mattresses for thousands of pounds. Now, Lachlan Campbell was a joiner and a shinty player until his diagnosis with motor neuron disease made it too difficult for him to physically continue with either. The 47-year-old father of four from Speenbridge near Fort William says he's struggled to access benefits he's entitled to, and it's had financial repercussions for his family. He says the system should be made simpler for people with incurable and progressive diseases like his. Ailey Davies has this report.
It's just cruel.
It's such a horrible disease, and you're literally watching someone just kind of lose themselves right in front of your eyes.
Lachlan Campbell was regarded as a giant on the shinty field, captaining his team Lochaber and representing his country at international level. 3 years ago, he was diagnosed with MND and can now no longer work.
I follow quite regular at work, and it's a matter of time before I really hurt myself.
If you can't keep your bills paid, then what happens then? You know, do you potentially have the threat of losing your home as well, on top of your husband not being well? And there's nothing you can do about it.
Lachlan says after being first diagnosed, he did try to apply for statutory benefits, but found the system too challenging.
My mental state was not good, and then trying to have a long conversation with someone who couldn't understand what I was saying, I just gave up in the end.
Some organisations like MND Scotland say the benefits system can be complex, but they can offer support for individuals and families affected by MND.
For those that are still working age, a household can go from 2 people full-time working to surviving on benefits, basically, and grants. So a really devastating impact. We know there are many statutory benefits. We have a team, and I think it's really important to say that we're here to support people with this. They're not on their own.
The UK's Department of Work and Pensions said it could not comment without certain personal information being provided. Lachlan and his family are determined to remain upbeat.
Just enjoy spending time together, doing stuff like what we can do, and just having fun and just trying to think positive. That's what he's doing.
There's not a day I don't think I wish that things were different for him, but I can't just sit about and be sad and angry and whatever. I still have to keep going too.
Try to stay positive. I'll keep going as long as I can.
Ailey Davis reporting Scotland, Speenbridge.
OK, well, time to get to night sport news now with my twin, Sheila McLaren. And Sheila, it's been a bit of a tricky spell for Rangers.
It has been, and today Philippe Clement says it's been a long week, but he's vowed to fight on. Hello there. The Rangers manager says he's not received any signal from the club's hierarchy that he won't be backed by them following the Ibrox side's shock Scottish Cup exit at the hands of Queen's Park. The Belgian says he met with Chief Executive Patrick Stewart after the game, like he does after every match, and his mind is now on getting a reaction from the players away to Hearts on Sunday. Clement admits some of the personal criticism from the fans can hurt, but he's eager to fight on and lead the team to better times.
Not one manager in the world has guarantees. Maybe Guardiola in Man City, but he deserves also, after all the things he did in a long spell there. So that's part of football. I know we didn't want to go out of the cup. I didn't have any other signal of no backing, and that's the case in football as a manager. So I'm going full to get the results that we want, and also to continue making the development of all the players.
Well, Neil Critchley has urged his Hearts players to feed off the crowd as they look to beat Rangers for the first time in 5 years. The Tynecastle side come into the match in a confident mood after knocking St Mirren out of the Scottish Cup and on a run that has seen them go 8 games without defeat in all competitions.
Well, we're in good form, yeah, so it definitely helps. We can go into the game with a positive feeling, knowing that we face obviously good players, good opponent, difficult challenge, but it's a great game for us to look forward to. So hopefully we can use the energy of the crowd and feed off their passion, and yeah, go and do everything we can to keep our unbeaten run going.
Aberdeen manager Jimmy Tilleen has confirmed goalkeeper Dimitar Mitov will be back in the squad for tomorrow's trip to play Dundee, and also says it was right to loan Slobodan Rubicic back to Serbian football for the defender's personal reasons. Meanwhile, Sivert Heltner-Nielsen, who was stand-in captain in the 3-0 Scottish Cup victory against Dunfermline, believes the Dons can be refined by the process of sticking together, despite a challenging run of 14 league games without a win.
I've been in bad situations before, and I know when you get out of it, it can get really good, because you've been through some very tough times together, and when you get out on the other side, it's very often a very strong team who gets out of it.
Now, it's a big night in the SWPL with Glasgow City and Celtic meeting at Petershill Park. Jane Lewis is there for us this evening.
Well, this has the makings of being a potentially significant match this evening in the SWPL, as it's the top 2 going head-to-head. Now, Glasgow City and Celtic lie top off the table at the minute, separated only, though, by goal difference. They're both lying on 50 points. Glasgow City top of the table by virtue of that goal difference, as I say. Now, going into the winter break, Glasgow City were 5 points ahead of the pack. Celtic were 9 points adrift, although they did have a couple of games in hand due to their Champions League commitments. But the champions have climbed up that table quickly and in impressive fashion as well, and they are now neck and neck this evening, so it could be an intriguing game. The last time they met in the league, it was Celtic who came out on top, a narrow 1-0 victory in that one. But Glasgow City just 2 weeks ago knocked Celtic out of the Scottish Cup. So all to play for this evening in the league. As I say, it could be an intriguing one. You can see all the action as it unfolds live this evening on BBC Scotland from 7:15.
And finally, John Higgins is out of the Welsh Open snooker after losing a closely fought quarter-final by 5 frames to 4 to the man they call the jester from Leicester, Mark Selby. Both players are 4-time world champions, and Higgins led by 3 frames to 2, but Selby eventually prevailed by taking the deciding frame comfortably. Another Scot, Stephen Maguire, has his quarter-final against Jack Lazowski tonight. And that's all the sport on a very red Valentine's Day.
Yes, I don't think you'd be able to tell by these outfits, Sheila. Thank you very much. OK, so it is time to take a look at the weather forecast now, and Callum is with us. Callum, you are in fact upstaging us all in this suit.
Oh, I don't know, we all got the love memo. So did the sky. Look at this beautiful love heart cloud. What more do you want? A match made in heaven, isn't it just, folks? Happy Valentine's Day to you all out there. If you're out and about tonight on your dates, I'll be watching the lamppost because we could have a few wee snowflakes for some of us falling today. Some brighter skies for some of us, but it was a match made in heaven up in the northwest. Cloud 9 for you all. In fact, there wasn't much cloud at all. You had glorious sunshine. There's the satellite from earlier showing that gap into the northwest. Elsewhere, the cloud thinned, but we've had this frontal pushing cloud in across southwestern areas. That's giving some drizzly rain at the moment, gusty winds southwestern parts. As it pushes in tonight in the colder air, it'll peter out as it comes up against the high to our northeast, but it will give some sporadic outbreaks of rain, sleet and even snow for some of us. Maybe a wee Valentine's covering out there by the time we wake up tomorrow. Here it is in the southwest, some gusty winds running from Stranraer to Barra as it moves in, giving some sleet and snow for some of us. Above 200 metres, maybe a couple of centimetres. Could be a wee dusting down to sea level for some of you. Cold out there, coldest where it's clearest in the north. -5, maybe a -6 locally before temperatures tend to recover a wee bit as the cloud expands northwards, leading to a cloudy day tomorrow. That front just stagnates overhead, may give some residual light rain, drizzle, maybe a wee bit sleet, upland snow once more. Cold, 3 to 6 degrees Celsius numbers, especially in that breeze, but once again best for the west and northwest for some brighter breaks, particularly West Lochaber up to Assynt, Skye, Western Isles lovely, more cloud feeding into the northeast and that easterly a scattering of showers. So we push for the mountains though, well, you will need the winter gear. Terrain widely frozen, perhaps icy following that precipitation overnight. Widely foggy as well, best in the northwest if you want the clearer conditions with some sunshine. Chilly in that breeze which will ramp up into Sunday itself. Strong, turbulent, gusty southeasterly winds, downslope winds into some glens too. Terrain widely frozen again, hill fog. But if you want the best breaks in the northwest, but try not to get blown over. On Sunday for the lower ground, well, it's grey, it's cold once more in that wind, which will be strong around some coastal areas. It will feel cold. Some residual flurries per the high ground, some rain and drizzle to low levels. Best of the sunshine once more in the northwest. I feel like a broken record. Into next week, this front bumps into the cold. May give some wintry precipitation on Monday for some of us, but then it gets chipped away that high and eventually gives way to some milder conditions later in the week, but it'll start cold. We'll grey, but then we'll have some warmer clouds later in the week, but have the brolly at the ready, I think, Sarah.
You are never a broken record, Callum. Thank you very much for that. OK, time for a look at tonight's main news again. As hundreds of prisoners are set to be released early, a support charity tells us the issue of overcrowding in jails is being put before victims and public safety. And residents at a block of council flats in Leith say the building's poor condition is breaching their human rights. The issue was raised at a United Nations committee today. Well, Anne McAlpine will be here with your late news at around 10:30, and that is all from us just now. Bye-bye.